chaired by Bernard Jenkin MP, has come up with some pretty scathing criticisms of the conduct of the referendum that took place last year. They said, of course, the government should have been prepared for a Brexit vote. Well, they weren't. They thought David Cameron should have stayed on to see a bit of it through. He didn't. And they criticised something that happened 1 year ago today. And that was, if you remember, a leaflet from the government that went to every single one of our households. It cost in total 9.3 million sterling of our money to tell us how we should think and how we should vote. I thought that was a disgrace. And one of the highlights of the referendum for me last year was walking up Downing Street and posting it back through number 10's door. But it went further than that. I mean, it even said that the government and the civil service lost the trust of the public because of the way in which they conducted the referendum. So pretty scathing stuff. And one little hint that says, and I'm not sure I believe this, but a little hint that says that the big campaign to get people to register to vote, because the system crashed and it had to be extended by a further 2 days, they said possibly there was foreign interference. Well, I'm not sure. I take that bit seriously, but it is a very critical report of the way in which the government handled the referendum. I have to say, personally, it does give me some degree of justification because I was pretty critical of the way they handled it. But it does, I think, raise a bigger and more interesting question. We, in the history of this nation, have only had 3 nationwide referendums. We had one back in 1975 on whether we should leave the common market. We had one in 2011 on whether to change the voting system to AV, which nobody understood and very few people took part in. And we had a referendum last year, which, whether you loved it or hated it, saw a massive turnout and was, a huge historic event. And the question that I want to ask you this evening, in fact, we're going to have our own referendum this evening, because you can tell me whether you think we should have more referendums or not. Should we, as a people, be able to call a referendum on an issue? So let me know what you think, and to get involved in this, if you think, yes, I want to have my say, I enjoyed last year so much, well, I did, certainly. If that's how you feel, then call 0345 60 60 973. If, on the other hand, you think, oh, no, hang on, we've got our members of Parliament, they're wonderful, brilliant, trusted people, it's for them to make decisions on behalf of us, then you can text me on 84850. If you think referendums are okay, but in the light of this report, they must be conducted freely and fairly, then tweet me on @LBC, not forgetting the hashtag Farage on LBC. And you can watch the show live by going to LBC's Facebook page right now. One question I do want to ask you is, what is the plural of referendum? Is it referenda or is it referendums? And people who profess to be experts in English have told me that both of those are right. I say referendums, but if I'm an ignorant peasant, would somebody please let me know? And I'm going to go to Jeff in Munich. Jeff, good evening to you.
Good evening to you, Nigel. Thank you for having me on again. It's your Vertrauter Feind in Munich, your trusted enemy.
I'm delighted to have you on, Jeff. Now, of course, Germany, of course, doesn't hold referendums because there were some held back in the 1930s that were not seen to have been free and fair.
Yes. Referendums are probably good things, I would say, Nigel, to you. I'm sure you had an awful lot of fun, but I didn't.
Right.
The referendum that you brought in damaged me as an expatriate living in Germany.
Well, hang on, you're still living there, Jeff, aren't you? I mean, no one's kicked you. I mean, no one's kicked you out, have they?
Well, no. I mean, there's another 2 years before.
And
Jeff, get kicked.
Jeff, nor are they going to. Come on.
Yeah, but what I would like to say about your specific point, if I may, is referendums may be good things, but the one thing that would be good is if the people who are directly affected by them were allowed to vote. I'm a British citizen. Mm-hmm. I never took German nationality. I trusted the EU regulations, the laws, the arrangements, the contracts between the British government and the European Union. And I didn't get a vote. David Cameron didn't give me a vote because I've been 15 years out. So now I and many other people in Germany, across Europe, British citizens, and the opposite way in the United Kingdom, are now wondering where the hell we stand. I have to go to solicitors. I have to pay 500 euros to try and sort out my documentation to get a second passport. So referendums are good, but they should include perhaps everybody who is directly affected.
It's interesting you say that, because a very similar argument has been made to me by a lot of people about Scotland, because, of course, Scotland had that referendum back in 2014 on whether to secede from the United Kingdom. And a lot of Scottish people living in London and elsewhere in England, and indeed around the world, said, well, it's our country, we were born there, we've lived there most of our lives, and we can't have a say. So, Jeff, I think that point that you raise, is not just specific to the UK referendum on EU membership. It applies to the Scots, and maybe it applies to all referendums. But I guess there is an issue here, isn't there, that unless you're registered somewhere and paying your tax somewhere, it'd be very difficult to work out who you would allow from the rest of the world to vote, wouldn't it?
Well, I mean, I would understand that. And Germany, as you know, is a regulated federal republic, and everybody's address is registered, and it's absolutely clear who is here and who is doing what. And I know there are a lot of, people coming into the country, but that is also controlled. But, as I said, the main point, I don't want to go at tangents because other people want to come on.
Sure.
I'll keep myself short. Is that all of those who are affected by such an issue on any referendum need to be involved.
Jeff, you raise a very good point. Not an easy one to enforce, but you do raise a very good point. And I'm sure you're enjoying life in Munich, and you'll still be there in 2 years' time. Don't worry. And, of course, there are many in Munich, many Germans in Munich, who are desperate for a good free trade deal with the United Kingdom because they sell us an awful lot of motor cars that are made there. Jeff, I thank you for coming on. Again, Steve in Camden, do you think referendums are a useful way for us to proceed? Should we have more of them?
Well, I do think they're the only truly democratic vote I've had in 50 years.
Yes.
Because if you happen to live geographically in a constituency that is never going to go your way, follow your choice, you never get the feeling that you're represented by an MP that reflects your feelings.
Well, I think, Steve, about 2/3, maybe a little bit more, of our UK constituencies for the Westminster Parliament are safe seats. And even when we have dramatic political swings one way or another, those seats are pretty much unaffected. So, yeah, if you're a high Conservative living in Sheffield, or, you're a socialist and you're voting in Suffolk, you probably get the feeling, what on earth is the point of voting at all? And that debate, Steve, of course, is as much about electoral reform, which I do personally think we have to have. But, I mean, this report today, very critical of the way the government and the civil service handled the referendum. How did you feel things were handled last year?
Well, absolutely. I felt that the brochure was an appalling brochure.
Yes.
It was very thin on facts. It was trying to be persuasive, which rather pointed out that the government were heavily leaning on one side of the information that they were giving you. But most of all, I thought if we don't have referendums very often, obviously we're not very accustomed to them. And it was a shock for a lot of people to actually have a binding vote, and to have a vote that was each person's vote counted just the same as anybody else's.
Yeah, I mean, technically, under our constitution, it wasn't binding, but morally, of course, it was. Steve, you enjoyed the experience of a referendum, and you'd like to have some more, yeah?
Very much so. I think mid-term, if we're going to have fixed-term parliaments, there should at least be one mid-term referendum to discover the feelings of people across the nation.
Steve, I thank you. Well, I have to say, I did, as leader of UKIP, which was the old me, in the last general election, put forward in our manifesto that we felt every couple of years there should be the opportunity to have a national referendum, provided 5% of the electorate had signed, a petition where we made sure that actually it was them that were signing it, and that we should be able to do this. And I personally feel that we do need to have the ability to call a referendum at national level, at local level. I even feel we should be able to call a referendum at constituency level. It's called recall. If we're not happy with the way our MP's behaving, we should be able, it seems to me, to sack him or her in between the 5-year period that we've now got set for general elections. And if we do this, we will actually hold the MPs to account. We, the people, will become the bosses again, and we'll beat this emergence of a new political class that we've seen of careerists over the last few decades, who in many cases, whether they call themselves left or right, whether their rosette is blue, red or orange, frankly, are pretty indistinguishable from each other. So I think we should have more referendums in this country. That's my view. I wonder what Simon in Basingstoke thinks. Simon, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. I totally agree, and you've just stolen one of my main points.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Which is that the political... I cannot remember a time in our history when the political class has been so divorced in its views from those of the people it purports to represent.
Yes.
I think a recall referendums in local constituencies is a better idea, is a great idea. And also a process much the same as Switzerland has, where you are allowed to put forward proposals which are then, and if you get sufficient support for them, that a binding referendum is then held, would be a brilliant approach. Because I think, for instance, after the last Westminster, after the last...
Oh, Simon, you were doing so well. And the line went. Never mind. Well, we got the first tweet coming in here. We need to reinstill direct democracy and devolution in the UK. I think that's probably right. No more referendums, says one. Referendums are great. Give power to the people of Britain rather than to those who sit in Westminster. The process to trigger a referendum needs serious review, says Ollie, and he's in Basingstoke too. A referendum is full democracy at work and prevents inept, corrupt politicians ruling the roost. Well, some quite strong feelings coming through there. And I'm going to go very quickly to Harry in Portsmouth. Harry, would you like more referendums in this country?
I'd definitely like one on HS2.
HS2? Now, that's that railway scheme that represents great value for money, isn't it?
That's right. The Lords are against it. They're sensible people in the Commons, but we've got an elective dictatorship, which means we're not going to do any transport for 30 years while they're building that. Yeah, well, we could be spending far less of the money updating the lines we've got, building new roads. Harry, I agree with you. But you see, what I'm saying is that, and this project's going to cost 60, 80 billion, some say even double that. My point, Harry, is that if there were enough Harrys out there, let's say there were 2 million Harrys who signed a proper, valid petition to have a referendum on this issue, we would be able to have one. Harry, I have to say, I have great sympathy with you. I think it is an enormous white elephant. Thank you very much. Well, I know some people were really upset by the referendum last year and don't want any more. After the break, I'll compare the 3 national referendums we've had in our country with some of our neighbours. But right now, you're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:15.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
Charlie Gard's desperately sick infant is to be kept on life support for 3 more weeks after a judge ruled that he should be allowed to die with dignity. Well, now, I feel very strongly about matters such as these because many years ago, one of my brothers was in a serious road accident. My parents were told that my brother would only be a vegetable for the rest of his life. And my parents said, well, if that's it, we'll provide the care. In fact, he went on to live a further 34 years, 30 of which he worked as a reporter on the Daily Mirror. So doctors do get it wrong.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast every weekday morning from 7, only on LBC.
With Hampton by Hilton, now open in Aberdeen.
Come to Galliard for brand new apartments at Orchard Wharf, London E14 from under £400,000 with estimated yields of up to 4.3% and deposits spread over 2 years. Orchard Wharf is only a 5-minute walk from the DLR, where you can connect to the tube in 2 minutes and arrive at Canary Wharf and next year's Crossrail in just 4 minutes. We're priced to sell and will fully furnish your apartment free of charge. Join us on Thursday the 20th of April from 5 p.m. till 5 p.m. Saturday the 22nd of April at the Crown Plaza Hotel, XL, London E16 1AL. Call 0203 770 6300 or visit galliardhomes.com. That's galliardhomes.com.
The Multi-York Spring Sofa Sale is now on, so don't miss big savings of up to 40% off all sofas, chairs, living room and dining ranges. And this weekend, there's also an extra 10% off everything in our Easter event. Visit us in store now or go online at multiyork.co.uk. The Multi-York Spring Sofa Sale now on.
Love your skin, love your hair, love your nails. Perfectil delivers nutritional support from within, including zinc, to help you maintain normal skin, hair and nails. Perfectil, the science of beauty, from Vitabiotics, the UK's #1 vitamin company, from Boots, pharmacies and vitabiotics.com.
It started with a letter in the mail, and then another. That's when they started. Soon you hear her. And now you're just struggling and panicking and just, how did it get so bad? The more you hide from debt, the worse it becomes. Capitalise has been helping thousands of people across London manage their debt with free, impartial, face-to-face advice. Get help today at capitalise.org.uk.
Divorce. It threatens the things you've worked hard for in more ways than you can imagine. Your home, savings, pension, and most of all, your relationship with your children. Don't let divorce cost you any more than it has to. Cordell & Cordell is dedicated to helping men in matters relating to divorce. Call now on 0330 60 60 161 or visit cordellcordell.co.uk. Office in central London. A partner men can count on.
Here at the Claims Guys, we'd like to offer this assurance to anyone worried by the deadline on PPI claims. There is still time to make your claim. Our experts will work fast to discover if you were ever sold PPI. And once we've completed your free PPI check, you can then pursue your own claim or let us do it for you. It's your choice. Even if you can't find any paperwork, just text the word EASY to 60777 and let the Claims Guys do the rest. Text EASY to 60777 now.
The Claims Guys.
This is LBC, the Nigel Farage Show. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Tweet at LBC using the hashtag Farage on LBC.
Well, we're having a referendum tonight on whether there should be more referendums. So if you haven't got time to call, why don't you join the Twitter poll? Just visit at LBC and answer the following simple question. Should the United Kingdom have more referendums? Vote and join me on at LBC. I will reveal the final result before the end of the show. We've been live on this now for a few minutes. At the moment, it's tight. It's 52% versus 48%. But I'm not going to tell you which way. Now, I think we should have more referendums. There may be some of you who didn't enjoy the experience last year. There may be some of you who think we live in a representative democracy. And that, of course, if you talk to people, constitutional experts, they say, well, the point is, the system we've developed over centuries is we send men, and now indeed women, we send men and women to represent us, and we entrust them to make those decisions on our behalf, and every 5 years we choose whether we think they're the right people or not. And that argument, I think a couple of 100 years ago, was very powerful, because we didn't know what was going on in the country or going on in the world, so we sent people to where the action was, the information was. But now, with 24-hour news, with all the access that we've got to information, I think we can make our own minds up on these issues. And I'm not suggesting that we should necessarily, have a referendum every Sunday. But it's very interesting that we've only had 3 national referendums in the history of this nation. And I'm just looking at some numbers here of referendums that have been held over the course of the last 20 years. The Hungarians have had 4, the Danes 5, the Poles 5, the Romanians 6, the Taiwanese 6, New Zealand have had 7, Lithuania have had 7, Latvia have had 9, Ireland have had 22, and Switzerland 180. Yes, 180 referendums have taken place in Switzerland over the last 20 years. And in America, they don't have national referendums, but they do have state referendums. They do have the power of recall, and there are lots of things every year in California that get voted on, whether it's the legalization of cannabis or whatever it may be, and the people get the chance to decide. And I don't think anybody would say that America was weakened as a democracy as part of that process. So I'm in favour. I think direct democracy, rather than the outdated concept of representative democracy, is the modern way to do things. It beats the political class and it makes you, the people, the bosses. That's what I think. What does Paul in Rumford think? Paul, good evening.
Hello, Nigel. I think we should have referendums, but like you said, immigration, keep it limited, basically, just because of all the time it consumes. I mean, as you can see, as a result of Brexit, the amount of time and energy used. Now, if we had one, say, every month or something, the MPs would be claiming in, overtime like no tomorrow. And I think they're probably on the fiddle with it. The other thing, I don't know if you've ever thought this concept. You know, you've got like your shows like, you know, the X Factor and Dragon's Den.
Yep.
Why don't you have like the referendums? You get like the top 6 referendums and people pitch them, and then you can pick the best referendum we do every 6 months. That'd probably be a really good idea.
Well, any mechanism, Paul, that gets people more engaged in democracy, I'm in favour of it. And if it works on an X Factor format, I wouldn't have a problem. If that was part of our way of choosing what we should have a referendum on. Look, we're not going to have, even if we move towards a form of direct democracy, we're not going to have an excessive number of referendums. But there will be times, Paul, when our political class are hopelessly out of touch with the way that the country feels. It's the way for the people of this country to hold Westminster and to hold our political class to account. And I don't think we'd see frivolous referendums. Certainly, if you need to get 2 million verified signatures, that of itself is a hell of a job, a hell of a thing to put together. It takes time and it takes money. So if the means of promoting that, Paul, is a big TV show, a radio show, whatever it is, in some ways, Paul, we're starting it tonight with this Twitter poll. All of you can vote. Just go to @LBC and answer the question, yes or no, should the United Kingdom have more referendums? So, Paul, we've started the process tonight already. What does Keith in Hemfield, West Sussex, think about having more referendums?
I would like to have more because at the moment I don't feel I'm democratically represented. I mean, there's a number of examples. I live in a very strong Conservative area.
Yes.
And before the last referendum, I wrote to our MPs on several occasions, as did a number of other people I know, asking him to attend public meetings to discuss whether we should stay in the EU or not. Him being, I know, somebody who wanted to remain at that time. Mm-hmm. And on those occasions, he hardly ever replied, whereas on most other issues, he does. Another point, when at the last general election, the Conservatives did not include in their manifesto anything to do with same-sex marriage, a subject I feel quite strongly about.
Yes.
And yet it was pushed through Parliament. It's not a party political issue. Therefore, it's something that I think people should have a general view about, rather than having to link themselves up to one of the MPs. And it's issues like that, I think, does make sense to put to a national vote.
Well, Keith, I have to say that you're right in this sense that if you're an MP in a safe seat, actually, do you know what? You can take all the correspondence and chuck it in the bin.
Yes.
And never answer anybody. People like you can be treated with complete contempt because it doesn't matter, because they're going to get re-elected anyway. And that sounds terribly cynical. But
he probably replies, but on the particular issue of the EU, where I think he was frightened, frankly, of standing up in public and trying to defend remaining, because there's quite a strong UKIP presence in this area, which I was quite involved in.
Yep.
And I think he just didn't want to face the public challenge. I think he would.
No, I think that's right. No, Keith, you're right. And you're one of so many people who don't feel not only represented, but properly engaged in the political process, given the way our system currently is. On Facebook, John says, can we have a referendum on no more referendums? Well, we're doing it, John. We're doing it now. If that's how you feel, go to @LBC and you can on Twitter, you can vote no. I encourage you to do so. Richard says there needs to be legislation to ensure that referendums on the same subject have to be at least 5 or 10 years in between them. Richard, I'd rather agree with that. Nicola Sturgeon, if you're listening, please let us know. It's funny because those 2 big referendums, Scotland in 14, the United Kingdom in 16, and Nicola Sturgeon rejects both of them. But there we are. Carol in Folkestone, should we have more referendums, Carol, or should we trust our MPs and our government to get on with the job?
Well, Nigel, good to talk to you. But I think if we had true representatives of the great British public and not career politicians, there wouldn't be any need for this. Now, I do recall, or as I understood it anyway at the time, I believe it was Michael Heseltine who said, this is back in the 1970s, that he declared the British public do not have the intelligence to decide the future.
Oh, yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes. But actually, there's a lot of them that think that. And if you listen to the way the full-time Ramonas now talk about the referendum, you would think that the people who voted for Brexit were ignorant, unwashed bunch of peasants, and that really it was quite wrong that any decision should ever have been given to them. And we've been getting that, Carol, from British politicians, but today we even got it from a German politician. Very interesting that the General Secretary of the SPD, the Social Democrat Party in Germany, who are, I think at the moment, actually leading Angela Merkel in the opinion polls. And their General Secretary, Katharina Barley, said that actually people in Britain didn't understand what the referendum was about. So we're stupid, Carol. But you know what? And I would say this to her and to Heseltine and to anybody. Are the Swiss too stupid to decide how they sort out their own country? They've had 180 referendums in 20 years. They're one of the richest, most successful, happiest countries on the planet. So, Carol, my view is that we should trust the people, but your argument is if our form of democracy was more representative, we wouldn't need this. Is that really what you're saying?
Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm saying.
So you're really saying that electoral reform is a higher priority for you so that people do feel represented than having referendums?
I don't think the people of this country are being listened to be honest. It doesn't seem to matter what people say. I mean, we were very lucky, and we are very lucky. We have Michael Howard, and he actually did listen. And I think he voted to leave the EU because he realised that there was very little that he could do.
The impotence of British government in the face of EU membership, and yet actually very rarely ever admitting it. Carol, thank you. Yes, yet somebody else basically arguing referendums are fine, but electoral reform perhaps is even more important. I'm going to ask George in Walthamstow. Does direct democracy work, George, in your opinion?
Oh, yes, it is. Yes, it does. I'm in favour of it, and in favour of more referendums. And in relation to what your last caller said, I don't think that electoral reform and more referendums are mutually exclusive.
No, certainly.
They're taken together. I'm for referendums because I think that it's a very good form of direct democracy. It closes the gap between what people think on the ground and on the street and what our MPs want us to think and what they think. And rather interestingly, in the World Democracy Index, the number one country in the world, most democratic, according to that index, is Norway, and it's had 6 referendums. Switzerland, who have had 200 squillion or whatever it was that you gave, they're actually ranked number 8. We're 12. So they're rated above us. So it could be argued that referendums contribute significantly to the overall level of democracy in any given country.
Well, of course they do, George, of course. And in fact, in Switzerland, they have them at national level, but they even at local level will discuss, housing development, a big extension, whatever. All that stuff gets voted on at local level too. It is a remarkable system. I was in Zurich not a couple of weeks ago. It is a remarkably successful country where they trust the people and where the politicians are held to account. George, thank you very much indeed. The referendum restored my faith that my vote actually counts. Living the dream on Twitter. I agree with that. You're listening to a Nigel Farage show exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30 and time for the news with Rupert Bhatia.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says talks with the US Secretary of State have been frank. He says he called for an independent investigation into last week's chemical weapons attack in Syria. Rex Tillerson says the United States remains convinced it was a planned attack by the Assad regime. A suspected Islamic extremist has been arrested in connection with last night's bombing of the Borussia Dortmund team bus. One player was injured. And official figures show a significant rise in gun and knife crime in London over the last year. Scotland Yard has released their annual crime statistics. Gun crime is up by 40%, while knife offences have risen by just under a quarter. LBC weather. Dry and clear for most into the evening. Showers possible in the far north, a low of 6 Celsius. Tomorrow becoming cloudy with patchy rain possible later, a high of 14 degrees.
LBC Travel. Good evening. I'm Andy Lake. Well, there was a fire at a builder's yard in North London near the M1 earlier on today, which saw the motorway closed for much of the afternoon and evening. It has just reopened northbound from Junction 1 for the North Circular to 2 for Five Ways Corner. It is currently still shut, though, southbound from 4 for Edgware, to the North Circular. But I'm hearing this is set to reopen soon as well. I'll keep you updated, of course. 2 separate diversions were set up, and it's still queuing on both approaches to those. It's also affecting the trains. East Midlands are suspended between St Pancras and Luton, and Thameslink is suspended between West Hampstead and St Albans. On the M25, both ways it's solid between the M3 and the M4 after a breakdown, particularly clockwise actually. Also crawling anti-clockwise approaching 6 for Godstone, where an accident closed 2 of the 4 lanes earlier. All are back open now. Severe delays as well anti-clockwise from 3 for Swanley to the Dartford Tunnel after a string of issues today. And in Warwickshire, the M6 is queuing southbound after a collision between Junction 3 for Nuneaton and 2 for Coventry earlier. All lanes lanes back open there as well, though. For more real-time traffic updates, go to lbc.co.uk.
This is LBC.
So, you're interested in building a property development business, but feeling unsure about the tax and legal implications and the potential pitfalls. You might have questions like, what business structure do I need? Should I incorporate? What about VAT and stamp duty? Or you may want to know how to minimise taxation on profits and learn about inheritance tax issues. For help, speak to Barnes Rofe, clever accountants for property businesses. Visit barnesrofe.com/radio.
Oh, the garden's an absolute mess. It's my turn to have the cross-stitch crew round for tea and Battenberg. I'll have to get a landscape gardener in and a wildlife expert. It's a jungle out there. We could be eaten alive by those deadly flutterbugs. Oh, relax, relax. It's Trust a Trader. Marvellous local tradespeople who've been tried, tested and reviewed. All specialists in their areas, from landscape gardening to pest control. Oh, visit trustatrader.com.
Trustatrader.com.
Can you hear that?
Yes.
Just listen. I know, it's the sound of hardwood furniture from Oak Furnitureland. It's the unmistakable sound of craftsmanship and quality at its very best.
Actually, it's the sound of customers knocking on the door to get in.
Well, don't just stand there, let them in.
The new Oak Furnitureland Brent Cross Superstore is now open. For exclusive savings and up to 50% off, visit your new Oak Furnitureland, Brent South Shopping Park, Brent Cross.
Travel Pack. Have the right flight at the right price. In fact, we'll price match most worldwide flights if you find one cheaper elsewhere at the time of booking. So, if you need to book a flight, remember the Travel Pack price match. Call Travel Pack on 0208 903 9999. You won't find a better price for your flight. Travel Pack 0208 903 9999. ATOL protected. Excludes low-cost operators. Competitors must be ATOL licensed. Conditions apply.
Are you confused about PPI? At PPI Hotline, we want to give you the facts. There is absolutely every reason to check you had PPI. Even if you think you never have, we can help you find out, as you could be owed thousands. And now there's a deadline. We just need the name of the bank you've had loans or credit cards with, and we'll check for free. So find out now if you're owed by texting WIN to 83222.
PPI Hotline. Text WIN to 83222.
This is LBC, the Nigel Farage Show. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Tweet at LBC using the hashtag Farage on LBC.
We're having a referendum on whether there should be more referendums. I think, yes, partly, of course, because I enjoyed myself last year so much. I'm missing it terribly. I'd love another campaign to be involved in, but not a second EU referendum campaign, because we did that. And it's over, it's finished, it's gone, it's done. But you can have your say. If you agree with me, there should be more referendums in this country on key issues. If you agree or disagree, just join our Twitter poll at LBC and answer that very simple question. I will reveal the result of our referendum before the close of play this evening. Now, just before I get to that, there's been a big meeting taking place in Moscow this evening. The Russian foreign minister says talks with the US Secretary of State have been frank. Sergei Lavrov says he used the talks to call for an independent investigation into last week's chemical weapons attack. But Rex Tillerson says the US view remains unchanged. Here he is.
The facts that we have are conclusive, that the recent chemical weapons attack carried out in Syria was planned, and it was directed and executed by Syrian regime forces. And we're quite confident of that.
Well, that's what Rex Tillerson and the US administration say, but very interesting. Former UN weapons inspector Scott Ritter, some may remember that name from back at the time of the Gulf War. He was the man who warned before the start of the Gulf War that claims that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction were utterly and entirely false. And Ritter, in the end, was proved right. What Ritter has said in the last 48 hours is that it is indisputable that a Syrian Air Force Su-22 fighter bomber dropped bombs on the town of Khan Sheikhoun. That is beyond doubt. But what he also points out is that that town is ground zero for Islamic jihadists, and that those Islamic jihadists have themselves, on 52 occasions, used chemical weapons. They've used a form of chlorine. They've even used a form of sarin. And that has happened repeatedly since 2013. His argument is that he doesn't see any evidence that they actually dropped bombs that contained chemical weapons, but they hit somewhere where chemical weapons were either being made or were being stored. Now, I don't know whether Rex Tillerson's right or whether Scott Ritter's right, but I have felt from the start of this, why on earth would Assad, given that he was winning the war, given that the international community had eased the pressure off him massively over the course of the last 18 months, why on earth would he risk all of that, dropping chemical weapons in what were actually limited numbers? I mean, he didn't kill fives and tens of thousands with it. He killed 80 people with it. Why risk everything for that? It's never made sense to me. Now, perhaps I'm assuming that Syrian dictators operate on the basis of logic, and perhaps I'm completely wrong. But I have to say I do rather agree with Sergei Lavrov. Let's have an investigation. Let's send in the United Nations or someone like that, and let's find out the truth. Back to your calls. We had a referendum last year. It was the third national referendum in the history of our country. It was, I think, a success, a massive exercise in democracy that engaged millions of people who'd probably never voted in their lives. I'm going to ask Karma in Enfield, should we have referendums or trust our politicians to get on with it?
Oh, hi, Nigel.
Good evening.
Good evening. Basically, all I would like to say is that, yes, referendum is the right of the people of this country. But when a politician goes out there and trying to advertise the wrong information to the public, I think that's supposed to be stopped and they should be brought to answer some questions for that. And that includes yourself as well. And what you said last year at referendum is not a truth. And a lot of people believed on that. And a lot of lives are at risk. A lot of people, like one of your callers said, he's looking for lawyers. And a lot of people that I know personally, they are looking for lawyers as well. And they're instructing them for them to get a visa or some sort of document to stay in this country, because these kind of referendums, they ruin people's life.
Well, Karma, I mean, like you, Karma, I'm very worried about the lies. I'm particularly worried about the lies that my parents faced in 1975. We were voting to be part of a common market. Nothing to do with politics. Don't worry your little heads. That was a lie. I'm worried about the lies of the former, I'm pleased to say, Chancellor of the Exchequer, who told us that our property prices would collapse, that unemployment would rocket, that foreign and direct investment into Britain would go down. So Karma, actually, do you know something? This use of this word lies gets thrown at each other in referendums, but equally it gets thrown at each other in general elections as well, doesn't it?
But the member of parliament, whoever sits in that house, they know exactly what's going on. But we as a public do not really understand that. Because all we see is that whatever is advertised, and we have to hear and read that and vote whatever it says there. And that information that's passed to us should be correct. And like yourself, you did whatever you did, and then after that, step down. Why did you step down? You should have stayed there and stay with them people to leave the European Union.
Oh, Karma, I have. You can listen if you want to. Karma, I'm leading a group in the European Parliament. If you didn't notice, I was actually doing battle with them last Wednesday. I intend to go on leading that group in the European Parliament right through this Brexit process. So I haven't run away. But as I say, you know, we can all accuse each other of lying, but I don't think the information given to people at a referendum is any less reliable than the information that's given to people in general elections or council elections or anything else. It is, I'm afraid, the rough and tumble of politics. Dishonest things and claims do get made. But I think the people are bright enough to see through it. They make up their own minds these days. I think politicians have very little influence, actually, on the way that people think. They either echo what people are thinking or they say things that people increasingly hold contempt for. I'm going to ask Zach in Reading. Zach, a lot of people, I mean, Karma wasn't, a lot of people so far like referendums. I haven't seen the update how my Twitter poll is going. But Zach, in this referendum on having a referendum, how do you feel?
I think, Nigel, we don't really have a true democracy. I'll explain. If I go down to my polling station, put my vote into the box, Then my, let's say, the representative that I want to vote for gets elected. They go to the Houses of Parliament.
Yep.
Now there's a system there whereby people can be whipped, quote unquote, like in inverted commas, by whips. Now, what's this whip business? So you've elected someone from your constituency to go and sit, and now you want your views to be represented. So why are they being whipped to force them to vote a certain way or another way? So basically, how is that democratic? Why are people not being allowed to vote the way they should be voting? Why is the party constantly overriding the constituency? So all you've basically done is sent your person to a place like a club where everybody else is going to tell them what to do. So I do believe that what you've actually raised today as a topic is incredibly important. And I think the stats that you said, particularly with Switzerland, I was shocked. I mean, I've never heard of that many referendums. And I think if you look at the Swiss, they look happy, they look content, I've met some Swiss people, they're amazing people, they're
absolutely.
Informed, So and we see them on the world stage.
And similarly, as I say, there are states in America that every year have referendums on the ballot and they make their own decisions. And actually, do you know what? When you trust the people to make a big decision, they don't make batty or silly decisions. They make very sensible decisions. In fact, arguably, Zach, the collective thoughts of the people of this country probably would give us better decisions than we're ever going to get in the House of Commons with the whip system and everything else. Zach, I thank you very much. Go on.
Oh, thank you very much.
No, thank you. I must move on. Lots and lots of callers. I've got to go to Luke in Redditch. Luke, do you want more referendums or is it a bad idea?
Oh, Nigel, I think it's not necessarily a bad idea, but I think first we as a country need to make more effort to engage in the political system that we already have.
Well, the argument, Luke, I would put to you is that what the referendum did was to engage people, because 2.5 million people who had not voted in the previous year's general election, and that was quite a high turnout general election by modern standards, 2.5 million people went out and voted in this referendum. It was the biggest exercise in democracy in the history of this nation. Surely that's a positive thing.
Yeah, of course, and I said that after the referendum, and I voted Remain, but I said that at the very least it had sort of made people engage more. But I think we have this representative democracy. My local MP at the moment is under the cosh about the local NHS. So people are trying to change things by engaging with her and holding her to account about what she said, the decisions that have been made. So I think that if we engage more on a local level,
if there was one thing, Luke, if there was one reform to the current system we've got, what would it be?
Sorry, Nigel, I lost you for a
second.
Yeah,
if there was one reform that you could make to our current system before we have a lot more referendums, what would it be?
I think that, I can't remember what it's called now, that it's in the news at the moment about the length of time that the Prime Minister can serve. I can't...
whether they can serve 1 term or 2 term? Yeah, America has that. Donald Trump's only going to serve 2 terms. I'm just winding up his opponents. Luke, I thank you very much for your call. Right now, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:45.
This is LBC.
Virgin Media gives fans all the football on Sky Sports and BT Sport all in one package, all at the best price. Search Virgin Media Football for more details. Virgin Media, for the fans. Cabled areas are new customers only. Comparison over 12 months can be verified at virginmedia.com/best price.
Here at the Claims Guys, we'd like to offer this assurance to anyone worried by the deadline on PPI claims. There is still time to make your claim. Our experts will work fast to discover if you were ever sold PPI. And once we've completed your free PPI check, you can then pursue your own claim or let us do it for you. It's your choice. Even if you can't find any paperwork, just text the word EASY to 60777 and let the Claims Guys do the rest. Text EASY to 60777 now.
The Claims Guys.
Whether you're battling traffic in Waterloo or crossing King's Cross like a king, if you're powering past Battersea or flying down to Canary Wharf, when you're going like the clappers to Clapham or want to get to Seven Sisters in one tap, At My Taxi, we're always looking for ways to improve our service and yours. So you can breeze down the bus lane safe in the knowledge that if your cab is black, this app always has your back. My Taxi, the black cab app.
At Wickes, there's 15% off everything this Easter, but it's a holiday. The buy now, do it later sale starts Friday. Wickes, let's do it right. T's and C's apply, end 17th of April.
This is your captain speaking. I'd like to welcome you on board today's flight. As we're currently behind schedule, we're going to skip all the pre-flight checks and just proceed with takeoff. I've given the tyres a kick and I think we've got enough fuel to get there, and the oil warning light hasn't come on yet, so buckle up and enjoy the flight.
You wouldn't fly without the proper checks, so why drive without them? Highways England recommends you check your tyres, fuel and oil before every long journey. For more information on vehicle safety checks, search Think.
Good morning, Swale Heating.
My boiler's died. I've just survived a cold shower.
Oh dear. Well, we can help. At Swale Heating, our expert engineers can install a brand new A-rated Worcester Bosch boiler with a warranty of up to 10 years and 1 year's free cover for the whole central heating system, subject to survey.
I think the cat's moved out.
If necessary, we can get your boiler installed within 48 hours.
And the dog's starting to look like an Arctic fox.
Rely on us to keep you warm. Visit swaleheating.com today.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Clive Bull.
40% of GPs are planning to quit the NHS, according to new figures. How have we ended up with a system that doesn't work for the doctors or the patients?
Clive Bull on LBC.
We're having a referendum on whether we should have more referendums after last year's great exercise in democracy, and we're having our own Twitter poll on this, and you can go to @LBC and answer yes or no to should the United Kingdom have more referendums, and lines are open for a few more minutes. And I wonder what Jeremy in York thinks of that proposition, which I back very strongly personally.
Well, Nigel, I can understand the case for more referendums. What I would say is the social cost paid in terms of sort of division in society. And as we heard with the previous caller, who was very angry and he was talking about getting lawyers and that kind of thing, I think from my own use of social media during the referendum campaign, it divides society along very, very clear lines, because when you're given a yes or no question, as we were with the EU, it becomes, people become entrenched in their opinions one way or the other. So if you're yes, if you no, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, if this referendum continue to sort of happen in a frequent manner over consistent issues, I think eventually society will become divided to very dangerous points. And we saw various outbreaks of that, in the referendum of sort of anger. And I think even now, the political temperature in the country is at quite a high point.
I'm not sure, Jeremy. I'm not sure I agree that it is now. It was last year, yes. Because it was the most important constitutional decision we will ever take in our lifetimes. And the stakes could not have been higher. The establishment wanted to win at all costs. And it did get horrible and ugly and dirty in many, many ways. And there was fault on both sides. Let me be clear about that. But I think now, we're nearly a year on, and the latest polling shows just about 70% of the country now supports the decision of the referendum and wants the government to get on with it. So I think there has been some healing. But Jeremy, let me put this to you. I mean, I do understand the basic point you're making, that when you ask people to make a binary decision, you're going to get strong opinions on both sides. I get that, Jeremy. I understand that. But actually, isn't our politics completely tribal anyway? I mean, aren't a large number of people who vote Labour just hate the Conservatives, and a lot of Conservatives just hate Labour? And hasn't our first past the post system actually given us a very divided country anyway?
I can understand that, but I think that with party politics it can be a bit different, because parties change leaders. As you see with the Conservatives, with Theresa May, they've gone in that direction with her, and she's doing quite well. And Labour's gone with Corbyn, and maybe less so. But as you see, parties change their image. Labour went from old Labour, new Labour, the Conservatives. We have red Tories, and we have One Nation, and all kinds of things. And I think parties change with the times and with the people, whereas a referendum decision, like the European Union one, that's binding, and that doesn't change depending on public opinion. And obviously, as you said, people support the decision, and I would agree with that completely. But I think if we put things through a referendum, and then it becomes a black and white yes or no issue, eventually people become entrenched. And you gave the example of Switzerland and their 180 referendum.
Yeah.
Well, I had a look, and voter apathy is quite high in that country. And in the last election, only about 42% turned out to vote, whereas here it was higher than 60%.
But Jeremy, one of the reasons why people don't vote in general elections in Switzerland in such a huge way is that their MPs are part-time. They're part-time because the big decisions aren't taken by MPs. The big decisions are taken by the Swiss people. So there we are, folks. We could halve the salaries of our MPs, put them on part-time. All you would have to do is turn up at the local primary school on a few more Thursdays than you currently do. Jeremy, I thank you very much for your view. I do understand the point that a binary decision leads to very high tensions. But equally, I get that maybe at the moment party politics is not quite as tribal as it has been in the past. I mean, whether you were pro or anti-Thatcher was pretty visceral, strong thing. Whether you were pro or anti-Blair in the end was pretty strong as well. But at the moment, of course, the Conservatives don't hate Jeremy Corbyn. They actually love Jeremy Corbyn because they think with him there, they're bound to win the next election. So maybe now is a slightly different time. I'm going to ask Vaisal from Cambridge. Good evening. Have you taken part in the Twitter poll, Vaisal?
Well, I did, yes.
Right, OK. And you can tell me now which way you voted and what you think, please.
Well, I voted yes to leave, but that actually broke my heart because I am strongly supporting European Union. Very main idea, first idea, to keep Europe in peace. This was the idea in 1940s, 1950s, after the Second World War.
Yes.
And this is an amazing idea to bring the Europe together.
Well, that's fine. Listen, nobody thinks it was a bad idea to get France and Germany together back in those days. But on the bigger, more general point, do you think we should have more referendums on key national issues?
We do.
We do.
I've been talking your show. I've been listening to your show, and you've been talking about other countries, how they're doing it.
Yes.
It's a very clear, simple that it works. It's a better idea to doing it more, to asking people about very important questions.
Yeah, and we can engage them and we can involve them. Faisal, I thank you very much indeed for your call on a slightly dodgy line. On Facebook, Keith says we need a referendum to abolish the BBC. I'm sure the global bosses would be very keen to listen to that. And Karen says we don't need too many referenda, she says. Now, I'm a referendums person. No one yet has corrected me on this. But on non-party political issues, it would be a good idea. So, issues of conscience, etc. Someone raised the issue of gay marriage, that it wasn't part of a manifesto, but it was done as a party political act in Parliament. I don't know. People would have differing views on the issue. The question is, should we be able to decide? John says, the Brexit referendum has got me more engaged in politics. John, I cannot tell you the sheer number of people that I have met in the street over the course of the last 18 months who say, we're now interested in politics. And in fact, a publican friend of mine, he said people would come in at 6 o'clock to his pub after a day at work. The last thing they ever discussed was politics. Now, every night, they're discussing politics. And some of them are even home by 7 o'clock to listen to LBC. I'm going to go to Chris in Stafford. Chris, are you for or against more referendums?
I'm for referendums in a way, but I think the biggest problem with referendums is the political class blocking or delaying, or if they don't get the answer they want, like Nicola Sturgeon, they get the referendum. So I think there has to be something that if we had more referendums like the Swedes do, that a referendum is binding rather than just a moral vote. I think it has to be more like a general election vote.
So you would like so you would go so you would like the referendums to be binding, and I do understand that. I think people were rather shocked last year when they heard it wasn't legally binding, although morally I think it was. And Chris, I would answer by saying that that politicians like Nicola Sturgeon, who consistently disagree with every referendum result that takes place, in the end, they will lose credibility, and the public, when it comes to their time at general or other elections, will vote for people that do respect the system. And I've got time to go to Jason in Worcester. Jason, are you for or against us having more referendums?
I think it's a great idea, Nigel. Pleasure to speak to you, by the way.
Thank you.
I think it's a great idea.
Yep.
It's already been alluded to regarding Switzerland that they do this. But what I like about the idea is that if you've got a group of politicians that are in what we might call the Westminster bubble and can only see things from one viewpoint and completely disregard how people might be feeling in the other parts of the country,
yes,
it would obviously give people the opportunity to say, well, look, this is something that concerns me, and I would like us to have a referendum about it so that the whole country can have its concerns aired and we can actually see what the whole country wants.
Yeah.
You know, it just makes sense to me.
Do you know, Jason, I think it's not part of our tradition because, as I said earlier, we've always had this idea of representative democracy, but that was when people didn't have 24 access to media, to information. I now think, given what happened last year, there's generally a feeling that we're big enough and ugly enough to make many of these decisions ourselves, and that at times, Jason, the political class are out of touch with the rest of us.
Incidentally, Nigel, don't mind me saying, and I'm sure this is true, if we were given a referendum regarding whether we wanted our sovereign powers handed over to the EU, I am absolutely categorically sure that the whole country unanimously would have said, no, we don't want that at all.
No,
we wouldn't have even had that.
I agree, Jason.
Last year.
They should never have given away our power in the first place. Jason, I thank you. So our own referendum, on having a referendum, the result is 52% in favour of more referendums, 48% against. That's what the technical operators here are telling me. I'm not sure I believe them. But then again, at least we won, rather like the referendum last year. Look, my view on this couldn't be clearer. I spent 20 years fighting for us to have a referendum. We had it, and not just because we won, but it was an amazing exercise in democracy, and I think a lot of people got engaged in politics. So I want to see more of them, but the rules must be fair. The rules have to be straightforward. Coming up at 10 o'clock, it's Ian Collins. Up next, it's Clive Bull, and I'm back with you tomorrow at 7 o'clock.
Thank you, Nigel. Now, coming up, we'll have the latest on US-Russian relations after talks concluded between the two countries this evening. EDF is hiking its bills for the second time this year, a move that's been described as hard to justify by the